There is a silent image that has followed the American man for decades. The figure of someone walking alone, with his shoulders carrying both pride and exhaustion, his eyes fixed ahead yet somehow lost. To many, this solitude is seen as failure, as if walking without companions meant being abandoned, rejected, or incapable of belonging. The common interpretation is that aloneness equals emptiness, that if a man stands apart, he must be broken or left behind. But what if this isn't the truth? What if solitude is not the absence of connection, but the presence of something far deeper? When a man steps away from the noise, he does not walk into a void. He steps into clarity. And though the world may label him as lonely, his path reveals another story entirely. I invite you, before we unfold this reflection, to pause and support this space. By subscribing, sharing, and leaving your thoughts in the comments, you help these words reach other men who silently wrestle with the same questions. Your gesture is not small. It is part of a chain that might carry light to someone standing on the edge of despair. Together, we spread this reminder that solitude is not defeat, but a hidden form of strength. Because perhaps the real reason the American man walks alone is not because he was left behind, but because he finally understood what cannot be found in the crowd. And as we move deeper into this truth, you may find that the figure of the solitary man is not a symbol of loss, but the beginning of freedom. From the outside, the man who walks alone seems incomplete. People glance at him and assume he must have failed to hold on to his circle, to his companions, to the warmth of belonging. They think of solitude as punishment, as if no one willingly chooses the path without company. But this vision is born from illusion. For in truth, many of the bonds we cling to are nothing more than silent contracts. I will play my role if you play yours. I will hide my truth if you hide yours. And when a man awakens to this, when he sees how much of his life has been spent maintaining appearances, he no longer feels the same hunger to be validated by others. He discovers that much of the noise around him was simply distraction, and in its absence, there is clarity. Before, he may have believed that his worth came from recognition, from how many people stood beside him, from the affirmation that he was needed and admired. This is the picture of the man entangled in expectations, constantly measuring himself by comparison, constantly negotiating his identity for the comfort of belonging. But after, the landscape changes. Walking alone is no longer a curse but a form of liberation. He no longer has to act out a part, no longer has to exchange his truth for applause. And though others see only the empty space around him, what he feels within is the vastness of freedom, an inner ground that cannot be taken away. There is a moment every man faces when he realizes that the world he built around himself was not truly his. The friends he gathered, the circles he entered, the identities he wore like armor, were in fact reflections of what he thought was expected of him. He pursued the approval of his peers, the admiration of women, the respect of his colleagues, and the silent nods of his father figures, all in search of a recognition that, once received, left him strangely hollow. And when that moment of disillusion arrives, when the applause fades and he finds himself alone in the quiet of his own mind, a wave of fear usually comes first. He wonders if he has failed, if his loneliness is a sign of weakness or rejection. But slowly, like a fog lifting over the mountains, the deeper truth reveals itself. This aloneness is not punishment. It is the space where his authentic self begins to breathe. Before this awakening, life seemed to move in endless repetition. He chased distractions, sports, women, money, achievements, each one promising satisfaction but dissolving as soon as it was grasped. He lived in constant tension, always searching for the next step that would finally silence his restlessness. Yet the more he accumulated, the heavier his steps became. The after is strikingly different. In solitude, he no longer carries the weight of pretending. He begins to see that his true value was never tied to how others perceived him. The long walks alone, once feared, turn into meditations, each step grounding him deeper into himself. What seemed like emptiness becomes a vast horizon where the soul can finally stretch. And of course, this change does not pass unnoticed. To those still immersed in the game, the man who withdraws appears strange. His absence at the usual gatherings, his refusal to play the old roles, his silence in conversations once full of gossip and empty laughter, all of it is unsettling. They whisper that he has grown arrogant, distant, or broken, but their judgment only reflects their fear of facing the same silence. For the solitary man, there is no arrogance in his distance, only a new kind of honesty. He does not need to hide behind masks anymore, and so his very presence becomes a mirror, exposing the illusions others still hold. And while they call it loneliness, he knows it is freedom. The solitary walk is never about the absence of others. It is about the presence of something greater within. When a man steps away from the crowd, he is not abandoning love or connection, but discovering that most of what he once called companionship was built on fragile illusions. Think of the gatherings filled with noise, where laughter is forced and stories are repeated just to fill the silence. Think of the rituals of competition, where men measure themselves by money, status, or conquest, silently comparing who has more power or recognition. Beneath all of it lies an unspoken agreement. Let us pretend this is enough. But when one man dares to stop pretending, when he no longer finds meaning in the performance, he is left standing apart. The world calls it loneliness, but in truth, it is simply clarity cutting through the fog. In the beginning, this clarity can feel like exile. To walk away from the common game is to risk being misunderstood, to feel the sting of being labeled strange or ungrateful. He might even doubt himself, asking whether he has lost something vital by refusing to conform. Yet with time, he discovers that what seemed like loss was only the shedding of weight that was never his to carry. The silence that once frightened him begins to reveal its hidden strength. It sharpens his vision, making him see the false promises that once trapped him. It deepens his breath, teaching him to live not by the frantic rhythm of competition, but by the steady pulse of his own heart. And slowly, solitude transforms into sanctuary. Those who knew him before will often struggle to understand. Some will resent his distance, taking it as rejection. Others will gossip, trying to explain his choices through weakness or arrogance. But what they cannot grasp is that he no longer lives for their approval. On the outside, he may look like a man who has lost his place in the tribe, but on the inside, he is more rooted than ever. His decisions are no longer dictated by fear of rejection. His silence is no longer emptiness, but space where truth can echo. He appears alone, yes, but he is no longer divided within himself, and this integrity, though invisible, radiates a quiet power. It is the paradox of solitude. What the world mistakes for isolation is in fact the seed of true connection. For only when a man is whole can he truly meet another without disguise. There comes a stage in a man's solitude where the contrast between the life he once lived and the life he now inhabits grows undeniable. Before, his days were crowded with constant noise, phones buzzing with empty conversations, nights filled with shallow pleasures, mornings burdened by the weight of proving himself again and again. In that life, silence was unbearable, because silence forced him to face himself without distraction. But after stepping away, he begins to notice how silence, instead of punishing him, starts to shape him. It teaches him to listen, not to the voices of others, but to the deeper pulse that moves beneath all appearances. Where once he felt chained to the demands of society, he now senses the freedom of choosing his own rhythm. This change is invisible to most, but inside, it feels like the difference between suffocating in a crowded room and breathing fully under the open sky. And yet, the external world does not easily accept this transformation. The man who no longer plays by the rules unsettles others, because his existence questions their own choices. They see him and wonder why he no longer chases what everyone else chases, why he refuses the same competitions, why he declines to participate in rituals of validation. To them, he may seem rebellious or broken, someone who has lost his way. They may mock him, exclude him, or try to pull him back into the game. But what they are really resisting is not him. It is the mirror he holds up to their own hidden doubts. His solitude shines a light on the illusions they still cling to, and so they reject him in order to preserve their comfort. Yet for the solitary man, even rejection is no longer a wound, because he has learned that truth always carries a cost, and he is willing to pay it. As this vision deepens, even familiar concepts take on new meaning. Loneliness, once seen as a curse, becomes a kind of strength, for it proves that he can stand without leaning on false approval. Failure, once his greatest fear, now appears as a teacher, stripping away illusions and leaving behind what truly matters. Desire, once endless and restless, becomes purified, no longer chasing shadows, but seeking only what resonates with his core. Power, once imagined as control over others, is revealed as mastery over oneself. These reinterpretations do not happen overnight. They unfold slowly, layer by layer, until the man realizes he is no longer the same. He has become someone who no longer measures life by the standards of the crowd, but by the clarity of his own heart. And while the world still calls him lonely, he knows he is freer than he has ever been. The deeper a man walks into solitude, the more he begins to see how everything he once called essential was, in truth, negotiable. Status, recognition, even the warmth of belonging. These were masks that seemed permanent only because he had never dared to remove them. But once they fall, he realizes that life does not collapse without them. Instead, it becomes lighter, more honest. This does not mean he stops loving or caring for others. On the contrary, his love becomes less dependent on need, less tainted by the fear of abandonment. He no longer clings to people out of desperation, but meets them from a place of wholeness. To the outside eye, this may look like detachment, but in reality, it is the birth of genuine connection, one that cannot be manipulated or faked. As he continues on this path, consequences begin to ripple outward. His choices grow clearer, no longer clouded by the urge to please or impress. He speaks less, but when he does, his words carry weight. He participates less in the noisy competitions of society, yet he is more present in the moments that truly matter. Those around him notice a difference. They may not understand it, but they feel it. Some withdraw, unable to handle the depth of his silence. Others are drawn in, sensing that within his solitude, there is a strength they secretly long for. In both cases, he no longer bends himself to meet their expectations, for he knows the cost of returning to illusion is far greater than the discomfort of being misunderstood. And so, the tension between appearance and essence grows. Outwardly, he may look like a man who has stepped away from the world, someone less ambitious, less social, less interested in the games everyone else plays. But inwardly, he is more alive than ever. His solitude is not a retreat from life, but an entry into its core. He is no longer trapped by the endless hunger for validation, nor haunted by the fear of rejection. What once appeared as weakness, his aloneness, has become his foundation. What once looked like emptiness has revealed itself as fullness, and what once seemed like loss has opened the door to liberation. The man who walks alone does not walk in exile. He walks in truth, and that truth reshapes every step he takes. What at first looked like exile now reveals itself as a form of clarity. The American man walking alone is not the figure of someone abandoned, but of someone who no longer needs to beg for belonging. He has paid the price of stepping away from illusions, and in that cost he has discovered something the crowd cannot offer: peace with himself. What the world calls loneliness is in truth the quiet space where he can hear his own voice again. What others mock as weakness is the very power that allows him to stand unshaken when approval fades. And what seemed like loss, the absence of constant company, the rejection of false games, has become liberation. He is no longer enslaved by the need to be seen, for he has learned the deeper freedom of simply being. This paradox is not easy, and it is not without pain. The man who chooses truth must let go of comforts, must endure misunderstanding, must walk roads where applause does not follow. Yet in the end, he finds himself whole. He is not cut off, but complete. He is not rejected, but free. And though the path of solitude may look narrow, it is wide enough to contain the vastness of his soul. The American man who walks alone is not defeated. He is awake. His steps may be silent, but each one carries the weight of a life lived honestly. A life that no longer fears being alone, because it has found a deeper union with the truth. If these words have stirred something in you, let them not remain only within your own heart. Subscribe to this channel so that you can continue walking with reflections that cut through the noise. Share this message with someone who may secretly need to hear it, even if they cannot admit it out loud. And leave your own thoughts in the comments, because every story, every reflection, every truth shared there strengthens this circle of men searching for meaning. Your voice matters here, and in speaking it, you may help another man who believes he is walking alone discover that his solitude, too, can be strength.